More and more women are taking jobs in the media and in science. According to Reuters and the University of Oxford, we're seeing a lot more females doing both, which is amazing too. And we're going to take a closer look at that here on 91.9 FM and APSU-TV. Welcome in. I'm Micah Terrell, and joining me today is one of Nashville's most well-known meteorologists, Lisa Spencer. She's the chief meteorologist at WSMV News 4. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here. And, I have such a kindred little connection with you, Micah. So it's good to be here working together once again.
I love it. Lisa and I worked together so many, I'm not even going to say how many years together.
Many
Um,
years.
Many. And I was behind the scenes and it was awesome. And first, Lisa, let's talk about meteorology. How did you become interested in that? You're a Tennessee native. You got to see, Tennessee has a lot of variety in the weather for sure.
Yes. I was not one of those kids who growing up looking at the sky thinking, oh, this is so fascinating. So I a late bloomer. Where I got interested in weather was through a college internship. So that's why I say never to anything or, oh, I'm not interested in that, because you might be if you give yourself the opportunity to learn more about it. And so that's why I always encourage people to go on shadow days, go on internships, just get a really good feel for what is out there, because I ended up at that TV station and I went to all the different areas in television, sales, and into the news department, and ended up in the weather department. And I spent a lot of time at the beginning over in weather and thought, you know what, this is wonderful. I really like this. Maybe this is what I want to do with my broadcasting career. But there was one little thing: I needed to know something about the weather. So then I had to switch gears, finish up my bachelor's degree, and learn a little bit more about the weather by approaching a master's degree.
Right, and there's math involved, which is
Yes.
interesting, right? So
Yes.
then,
Yeah.
yeah, so you got your associate's, your bachelor's, and your master's. So how did those help you in your career path towards the meteorology?
Yeah, we are so fortunate in Tennessee now that people can get an associate's degree very economically. So I think folks should look into that as an option for them, because that's what I did. It was a little different back then, but I was able to saved my parents a lot of money and went through that associate's degree first, and then transferred to what was Memphis State University, which is now the University of Memphis. And that's where I got my bachelor's degree and went on that internship that helped me get interested in weather. And I wrapped up my bachelor's degree, and I was actually going to do a master's and be a grad assistant in the communications department, but decided that I really wanted to go this weather avenue. So I looked for opportunities. How could I switch degrees, or because I finished my bachelor's, how could I switch modes and get into weather? And at the University of Memphis, they had at the time, and I'd have to check now, but at the time they had an atmospheric sciences program in their geography department. And so that was my way of getting that weather knowledge that I needed. But it really is important. You don't necessarily have to have a master's degree to be a broadcast meteorologist, but you do need a bachelor's degree for sure, because we're at a point now where really no television station is going to consider you, especially if you're new to the business, unless you do have that bachelor's degree in meteorology or atmospheric sciences or something related to weather.
Right, because there's a lot of, and I know you use a lot of equipment too that's really high tech as part of your job. So that's definitely probably helps too.
It is. And fortunately, so many colleges now have some equipment on campus. So you do have an introduction to that. Unfortunately, I did not. I had to learn the harder way, but I did have that. A lot of kids do have that opportunity now to get that during college, whereas I had to get that on the job.
Yeah, and then that's you'll never forget, right? I got that on the
That
job
is
training.
right.
So how
That's
did you
right.
get into broadcasting, get that big break, I guess? Because again, a lot of us have that, one door opens that you can get into the broadcasting industry.
That is so true. I mean, and a lot of times people say it's who you know. Well, it's not necessarily who you know, but who you meet along your journey that can help you to open a door. And that happens for me because I was taking these classes at University of Memphis, working towards this atmospheric sciences degree. Well, lo and behold, in my class was one of the weather anchors who was a weather anchor at the time, wasn't a meteorologist yet. He was also taking classes working on his degree. And, obviously we got to know each other because we were pursuing the same thing, but he was already working in the job. And so he said, "You know what? We have a weekend opening over at WHBQ, which is where he worked, and that's in Memphis. At the time, it was an ABC affiliate." And he said, "Would you like to come over and audition for us?" And would I? Yes, I would. And I said, "The only thing is, I have," and we can talk about that in a second, but I did have some radio experience. So I already had a little bit of that gift of gab, so I could do that part. But I said, "I'm gonna need some help on the other part because I've never worked in weather before, just my internship I had." And so he helped me. He coached me. I went over there, after class. I mean, just whenever I could squeeze in some time. And he started coaching me on this job. And I auditioned when we thought I was ready, and I got the job. So it was I started in Memphis, which is really, I mean, Michael, that's a pretty good size market to have your
Yeah.
first job opportunity. So I felt really fortunate, but it was because I took advantage of getting to know someone and letting that door open for me, and I walked right in.
That's amazing. And then, yeah, because Memphis it's a larger market. And then just, I think that's awesome that you had someone kind of take you under their wing and kind of teach you some of the things. Because, like, for instance, when some of the budding meteorologists here at Austin P, they don't understand that you're not like the anchors. You don't have your big scripts and things and prompter. You
Right.
basically, all the knowledge that you gather is things that interpret models and do all those things. So what was that like learning all those things from this weather anchor who was also learning to be a meteorologist?
It was really a grand opportunity for one thing. And so I was determined that I was going to do everything he said and just be a sponge and soak it all up and ask as many questions as I could and take advantage of getting to work on the chroma key wall because that was such a great opportunity. The first thing he had me do, Micah, which was great, he said, "When I see you next time, you need to know all 50 states and be able to point to them on a map." Because you forget about, I mean, you know the states, but can you point them out just like that on a map? And that can be challenging. And I did that. And he also had me read The Golden Guide to Weather, which was just this little bitty blue book. And I did, even though we were taking weather classes. He said, "I think this will be great for you," because he just was one of those people that back in that time, and I got started in the 80s. Um, at that time, you did see more people who weren't meteorologists doing the weather, but he had taken it upon himself to learn more about meteorology. He had come over as a reporter. He was a reporter first and then went into weather where he was for, and he just retired. I mean, he worked in television for, well over 40 years. So, he was just such a great inspiration. But I think that's what you have to do when you meet those people, whatever they're willing to share with you, just soak it up, be a sponge, ask questions.
That's a great bit of advice too for all of our budding, I would say all of our budding broadcasters in general, right? Need to know that for
Yes.
sure. Yeah. So again, if you're just tuning in and listening, I'm Micah Terrell with 91.9 Public Affairs and APSU-TV. And I'm speaking with via Zoom, Lisa Spencer, the Chief Meteorologist at WSMV News 4 in Nashville. We're talking about women in meteorology, which is a great thing. We've seen a lot more women joining. I was looking at numbers and I saw like they said in around the 90s we had about 25% women to 75% women, and then now it's looking more like 40% women to 60% men. So that's really good to see. Things have changed a lot, and of course you have probably seen that too. What have you noticed, and particularly being a chief meteorologist? That's more common now, but you got to see that change happen. What was that like seeing that happen as you went through your path in meteorology?
When I first began there in Memphis, I worked the weekend shows, and most women who did weather did the weekends or they did the morning show. And we'll just kind of reflect back, like just 10 years before that in the 1970s, we went through this era of the weather bunny, which was, a time where anyone who was very attractive on television could get up and do the weather. Unfortunately, they didn't necessarily know anything about the weather. So women had a really hard time as they started to become scientists overcoming that weather bunny. And still to this day, it kind of grates on me a little. People want to say, "Oh, you're the weather girl." Because it always makes me think about that era we went through in the 70s where we didn't have women who had science degrees presenting the weather. And now we do. And my what I saw through my journey was first I went, and this was incredible that this happened to me, but again, looking for doors to open. I went from WHBQ to the Weather Channel. And at the time, the Weather Channel was really a little known cable network. And of course, we know what it's grown to today. But I had just a wonderful opportunity to work at the Weather Channel and just be immersed in the science. And one of the things is, I think the Weather Channel really led the way in having women be in front of the camera all hours of the day because they hired so many women to do weather. Now it's a balance. We had men and women, but there were more women than would be what you would see out just at your regular television stations. So I do think they opened the door. And when I left the Weather Channel, I had an opportunity to be a chief meteorologist, and this was at WNCN, which at the time was an NBC station in Raleigh, North Carolina. And at that time, Micah, there were a handful of women who were chief meteorologists, and I was among just such a small group. I would go to the American Meteorological Society conference, and it was me and a couple of other gals and a lot of guys. And it's just changed so much since then. And then, of course, I moved on from WNCN and came here to Nashville. And I don't know if people realize this, but here in Nashville, we are very, very unique that we are the only television market in the country that has all four stations with women chief meteorologists. That is such a rarity,
Mhm.
and that did not happen years ago, but and we all know each other and we get along great. And it's just kind of like, I don't know, it's just kind of a cool thing to have all these other women who are doing what you're doing in what was originally a male dominated profession.
That is so amazing, and I'm so glad you brought that up because I was gonna ask you, what was it like when you were named chief meteorologist? Because I know when you joined News 4 at first, it was obviously in the meteorology position, and then eventually that happened. What was that like to become, the chief meteorologist at the station?
Yeah, when I came here, I took what professionally was probably a step back because I wanted so badly to get back closer to home to my parents. I'd had some babies by then, and we
Yeah.
like to get children close to grandchildren, children close to grandparents. And my parents live in Jackson, Tennessee. So I came here to work the morning show. Hoping that one day I might move back down into the chief meteorologist role. But at the time, Bill Hall was here, and Bill, of course, legendary weatherman in Nashville, so popular, so beloved. And I got the opportunity to work with Bill. But what eventually happened was I worked the morning show for a couple of years. And then Bill started saying, I really want to pull back and do less. And so they decided to move me, our station management decided to move me to the evenings and have me work with Bill. So Bill would do one show and I would do the rest of the evening shows and I would produce his weathercast for him. And that gave him an opportunity to really pull back. And then eventually it came a time where he wanted to retire. And so I was named chief meteorologist at that point. And it was a fantastic feeling. No one could ever fill Bill's shoes, but to have the opportunity to work beside him and just feel like I grew into this role here in what is such a legendary station here in Nashville, the first television station in Nashville.
Exactly, a legacy station for sure. And
Yes.
that Bill, because we both got to work with Bill, and you, of course, in a much different role because I was, producer producing the news and say, okay, Bill, do we need to lead with weather? And he'd be like, well, yeah, it's gonna get rough, or whatever. What kind of wisdom did Bill share with you when you were just joining the station and then, of course, transitioning into your later role?
Well, I think one of the things that made Bill so popular is that he was just like your everyday day guy. I mean, he talked about the weather like we all talk about the weather. And so I kind of gleaned that from him, like, okay, I'm just going to be that neighbor person that you talk to every day and be pleasant. And that's what I really got from him is be yourself, be conversational, talk about the weather in a way that everybody can understand it. And that's what Bill did so well. I got that from him, and just he was just such a great guy. I just feel like I gained so much from his experience and how he had transitioned because he used to be the announcer at WSMV when he first started, and just how he grew into that weather role. So I had a lot of respect for Bill, and just just being around him, kind of being that sponge again. Even though I was very experienced at that point. You can always learn something new from someone who's more experienced than you, or even someone who's not. I mean, everybody brings something to the table.
Right, and Bill did for sure. I think about my one thing, and it's not just one thing, but one thing I always think of, I see people in my neighborhood, they're already trying to put their plants out right now, and I'm just like, Bill would say, "Wait until tax day, wait until tax
Yes, he did.
day." Right. So, yeah, again, great guy, we'll miss him so much. RIP Bill, for
Yes.
sure. And again, if you're just tuning in and joining us here on 91.9 FM and APSU-TV, I almost said WSMV, out of habit. We're talking with Lisa Spencer. She's Chief Meteorologist at WSMV News 4, and we're talking about meteorology, and you've worked with a lot of amazing people through your journey, right? Lisa, you've worked in West Tennessee and Memphis. You've worked with Bill Hall in Nashville. You worked in Raleigh, North Carolina, and at the Weather Channel. Who inspired you the most, do you think, in your journey?
I'm gonna have to go back to Jim Jaggers in Memphis at WHBQ, because Jim was that first person who took the time to help me grow and learn. And we remained friends over the years. And I would call back to him, "Hey, I've got this opportunity to go to the Weather Channel. Hey, I've got this opportunity to go to Raleigh. I've got this opportunity to go to Nashville." I mean, I, over the years, have continued to reach out to him for advice. And he also runs stuff by me too. And so it was, I just like, oh my goodness, he's going to stop doing this finally. And, which was also, I said, well, how did you make that decision? I thought, well, I can still talk to him about all this stuff because he's still one step ahead of me. But he's probably been my mentor, and the person I've looked to all these years for advice and just how you do this. He's just been really a great friend.
It is, and it's so good that you have someone who's been there throughout, from the beginning through now, which and that brings up, what would you like to keep doing this for a while, or is there, would you like to teach meteorology down the road, or think there are things you want to do that you haven't done yet?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still in it for a while to come. But one of the things that I really love about my job is speaking to children about the weather and civic groups as well. So, hey, if you've got a connection there and you're looking for a speaker, you know how to email me, Lisa Spencer. I'm just L Spencer at WSMV.com. But I love reaching out. And so that kind of went into an offshoot of writing a book, a children's book, because I always thought I would read books, especially to the kindergartens and the first grades, because that's a great way to launch off on on a subject. If you can read them a story, so I started reading this story called Franklin and the Thunderstorm, and that would launch me off into talking about thunderstorms, and we'd refer back to Franklin and how Franklin was afraid of thunderstorms, and it was a great introduction to weather. And I kept thinking, what? my own book. And it took me a long time, but I finally written my first book, How Do Meteorologists Predict the Weather? And I have another one written as well, which I'm working on getting published, but it would be my answer to Franklin and the Thunderstorm. And it's called Dogs Caught in a Thunderstorm. And it features my dogs as characters, my real dogs. So
Well, that was
that's
awesome.
my book. I'm still working to get published. But yeah, I think that's one avenue I want to take as I continue on my journey, just continuing to write children's books. But it's hard and working a full-time job because weather is a very demanding job at a television station.
It's very demanding. I don't think people understand. You just don't pop in and say, hi, that you have a lot of preparation to do. And we'll get to that in a minute, but I did want to follow up with you about the talking to young people. That's great that, and I know you visit schools and you talk with groups and everything. What kind of conversations have you had with them about maybe science and the weather that maybe led them to be interested in it later?
I always, before we're done, because the teachers love this part, I always tell them, even when they're young, I always say, okay, if you want to be a meteorologist, first thing you can do is go to the library and check out all the books about weather and learn as much as you can about weather because you can start now. And I always will share with them that you want to take those hard classes when you get older and can pick those classes like your chemistry classes, like your calculus classes, all the things that will challenge you because that's going to be a good base for when you get to college and you take that meteorology degree one step farther and end up with a bachelor's. So it's really important to start now, and they can start by working on learning about weather and taking those hard classes, really studying and focusing on their math and also their science. Because I tell you, I'm the other brain person. I was more of an art brain person, and it was challenging to me. And I'll be the first to admit it. So, that's why I say start early, really focusing on those science classes because they'll help you in math.
Of course, all of those, yes, and I'm glad you mentioned all those atmospheric sciences and everything, because yes, so interesting and so good to get it now, right, and not wait. So to move back to we talked about the prep work, you don't just show up at the TV station, "Hey, I'm ready for the 5 o'clock news." There's a lot of work involved. Tell us a little bit about what you do to get ready for your newscasts, preparing your weathercast for the day.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do think we just rip and read, like we rip off a forecast and read it on the air, which is not it at all. We come in and it's evolved over the years, as you well know, from just the technology advancements that we have. But we go in and we take all the data that is available to us from current observations across the entire country to numerical computer generated models that simulate the weather. Basically, that's the easiest way to say they simulate the weather, but there are a lot of them, and you have to look at those, see which ones are doing well, which ones you kind of think you might agree with, and you get what we call spaghetti charts because it looks like a bunch of spaghetti lines on the chart, and that's the weather systems moving across the country. So you have to learn how to interpolate those, and you also get number data too that suggest temperatures. And we have to take all that information and put together our own forecast. And once we do that, then we have to put together the graphics that you see on the air because we don't have anybody that does our graphics for us. Fortunately, we have a lot of it where we can just plug in numbers and it'll generate it. It's that automated now, but you still, have to generate some of those maps by hand, and it takes time. So those things are parts of our job that people don't think about. They think we're just on TV for that 3 or 3.5 minutes, but there's a lot of behind the scenes work that goes on that's really a bigger part of your day than the time that you're spent on TV. But I will tell you one thing: we have more newscast than we have ever had, and that is the trend in television, a lot of local programming. So we have for me, we have a 3, 4, 5, 6, 6:30, and 10 o'clock newscast in the evening. And then in the morning, they start at 4 and go all the way until, let's see, the Today Show, and then cut ins during the Today Show. And then after that, we have a 2 hour midday show. It's a lot.
It is a lot, and, it's again, people not understanding, it's like you have to prepare all those graphics and everything, and then again, you're not scripted, you are again, have all that information up here that you're doing, and then when the things happen, like the tough assignments, like you got a severe weather day, and say things get really rough, like maybe you have some tornadoes and you have to track things, what kind of explain to folks what's involved in that when you have again, say for instance, a tornado, you have spotters that you work with who say, "Hey, we've just spotted a tornado," then things kind of shift, don't they? You have basically where you basically kind of go, what I think in the news we call it the wall to wall, where you go and everybody's just it's all weather and we're all working to gather weather information.
Yeah, I mean, when severe weather coverage comes, I mean, it just takes over because weather is the number one reason that people watch television news. And it's, as much as people will say when you interrupt their program that they don't like it because they miss their program, but it's our duty to get that severe weather information. And it's amazing how high the ratings go because people are truly interested in severe weather. So we try to know ahead of time, obviously, because we want to know ahead of time if we're going to see thunderstorms because we want to make sure we've got enough staff there. We like to work with no fewer than two people if we're going to have tornadoes and severe weather coverage like that because you want to be able to go back and forth between the two of them because if you're talking nonstop, I mean, you can well imagine you're going to lose your voice. So we go back and forth, and you can be on the air for hours at a time. Fortunately, we have equipment now that allows us to easily track thunderstorms with our radar, and we're the only TV station in Nashville that has its own live radar. So we use that in conjunction with the National Weather Service radar. And we are able to track those storms. Our equipment will interpolate how long it's going to take a storm to get from point A to point B. And that's how we can say, hey, it's going to be in Clarksville at 6:55. It's going to be in Springfield at 8:02, whatever the time may be. But that's how we're able to do that as our equipment can interpolate it. Years ago, you had to do math. You had to figure out the storm's moving this fast and it's going to be here at what time. But now the computer does it for us, which is great. But you really do go into a totally different mode. And my whole goal is stepping back to think about Bill Hall. I want to be that calm person in the storm. So I try not to get overly excited or let my voice go up 3 octaves. I mean, I really that's an exaggeration, obviously, but I try to be the calm person in the storm because it's scary for some people.
It is, it really is, and that's what leads to my, next question for you. What's the toughest assignment you think you've had as a meteorologist?
I think any tornado event is going to be really tough. The one though that comes to mind that sticks out was the flood of 2010, and the reason it does is because of the duration of the event. I mean, it went over. First off, the rain rained. I mean, it was raining for 2 days, so and it started flooding pretty early on. So we knew we were in trouble. And not only did it happen for 2 days, but then the aftermath went on what seemed like endlessly. So there was a lot of on-air work at the time, but also think about it was so widespread that we were all impacted in some way, whether it be try to get to work and back home again just because of the flooded roads or just because your own house was flooded. I mean, there were so many variables there. That was one of the most difficult things to cover. And then when it comes to tornado events, the one that still sticks out in my mind was 2008. That was a tornado that started in right around the Lawrenceburg area, kind of that southwest corner of the mid-state, and went across Middle Tennessee and dissipated when it got to Nashville, thank goodness, lifted up and reformed again and went through parts of Sumner County, Macon County, up in that general direction, northeast of Nashville. And what was to me so devastating is the loss of life when it got northeast of Nashville. I mean, it was over 20 people um, died, and one of them was the mom of a little boy. And this story just still touches me this day. When the rescue folks went out looking for people because so many people were missing. They they had already found the mom, but they had not found the baby. And this rescue guy who's out there looking through the field, he saw what he thought was a doll. It ended up being that missing 18-month-old. And he was alive, just scratches. That was it. And fast forward to several years later, I always wondered what happened to him. And years later, I was speaking to a school in Trousdale County, and his teacher whispered in my ear before we got started. And she mentioned his name, and she said, "He's in my class. And remember, he's the little boy that they found when he was a baby." And
Mhm.
so I talked to him as a second grader, and it was just so that was kind of a full circle moment from, just such devastation years ago when he was a baby to here he is a little boy in the second grade. So that was one of the most memorable events in terms of just the stories were just rip your heart out, the devastation it had. And oh gosh, there's been so many tornadoes that, I mean, the Nashville tornado, I mean, the Clarksville tornado in 97 that they've done so much destruction that a lot of stories to tell.
So many, so many. And I know we've talked about a lot too, but what did you want to share with everyone listening and watching that we didn't talk about yet?
Well, I actually got my career started in Jackson because I always knew I wanted to be in broadcasting. I was a 4-H'er. And many of you know the 4-H club, and it's not just for farmers. I wasn't a farmer. I lived in a little suburb out just outside a neighborhood outside of Jackson, and I was in 4-H, and I always gravitated to the speaking in 4-H, and ended up getting my career started when I was in high school, and that was at a little AM station running what I call the preacher tapes because on Sunday morning you do one, and it was reel to reel.
Oh
I'm dating
yeah.
myself. Reel to reel, cue up those reel to reel tapes. And I would play one preacher tape after another. Now, granted, I'm 17. And so you can imagine how boring that was for a 17-year-old. But I got my start in radio that way. And I would get to rip the weather off the AP wire and read the forecast between the preacher tapes. And then eventually I got to play music on the station. And that was my beginnings of a career. And I thought I was going to stay in radio. And that's what I went to school for, was to continue in radio, and worked in Memphis in radio actually for about 6 years while I was working on my degree in atmospheric sciences. So I have this whole other life before TV weather. And so, that's why I always say, open your doors and look at all the different options you have, and because you may find something that you never thought about before. So if I have that advice to give, that's take advantage of internship, shadow days, any opportunity to see what you do in different jobs, because it may be just the right job for you.
And thank you for bringing up radio because, again, as well, started, hey, I'm going to do radio the rest of my life. And then Channel 4 knew, well, it was Channel 4 at the time, had an opening for an associate producer, and boom, there, and that's how, then eventually met up with Lisa, and here we are. So thank you. Great advice for everybody who's, again, broadcasting or not, again, pay attention to those different avenues and really, like you said, be a sponge and get it all and soak it up because you never know, right? Where you're gonna go.
You never know. And the interesting thing is when it comes to weather, there are a lot of jobs just besides television that you can be in. I mean, there's the National Weather Service, all the airlines, if you think about it, they all have meteorologists on staff, trucking companies. I mean, there are so many, a lot of the big events like golf events, golf tournaments, they have meteorologists. They have to keep the golfers safe. So there's so many different things that you can do. And of course, the exciting one for a lot of people, storm chasers, which a lot of those usually work for universities because you can be a college professor in meteorology too.
That would be awesome. We would love to have you, Lisa, if you ever want to change your mind. But thank you, Lisa, so much for stopping by. Lisa Spencer, the new chief meteorologist at News 4 WSMV in Nashville. Thank you so much for stopping by.
You are so welcome. It's good to
Thank
see you again, Micah.
Good to see you too. And I'm Micah Terrell with 91.9 Public Affairs and APSU-TV.